All right, so in this stream, we're going to focus on what island biogeography is and what it's describing, as well as the factors that affect island biogeography and what they tell us, and a graph that will help us understand these factors, and then more factors that play a less important role. All right, island biogeography. Island biogeography is also known sometimes as insular biogeography. College Board uses island biogeography, so that's what I went with. But basically, we use island biogeography to compare biodiversity on different islands. A few of these factors that we use to do this are distance from mainland, human interaction, and the size of the island. Later in the stream, we'll talk about what we can get from these different factors. But for right now, just know that those are the three main factors we're looking at when thinking about island biogeography. And another important thing that I left off, island biogeography is a theory. So it's sort of kind of using logic to explain why things happen on an island. So don't think like, oh, math and this kind of, nope, it's just a theory to help us understand what is going on the islands. And then furthermore, we can use this theory to examine the evolution of species on an island. So you might, we'll see how size of an island impacts resources and competition between species, how humans impact it, how the distance from mainland might affect species and how they get there. And all these different things play into this theory of island biogeography. All right, in the chat, let me know if you guys have any questions as I go through this. My job is to help you guys. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to let me know. All right, so in the chat, let me know straight off the bat, with any knowledge you have right at this moment, which do you think will have more biodiversity? Madagascar or the French Southern and Antarctic land? All right, we'll see if your answer is right as we go through the PowerPoint. All right, so the first factor we come into when discussing island biogeography is distance from mainland. The reason why we focus on this one a lot is because it affects how new species are going to get to said island. The way I like to think of it is with birds, because that's just how I understood it. A bird might fly from Africa to Madagascar, but the probability of a bird flying from Africa to the French Southern and Antarctic lands, which is some random island out here, is very low. So the distance from mainland, the shorter the distance between the mainland and the island, are going to impact the immigration rates, which is the amount of organisms coming to the island. However, whenever you're far away, you're not going to get a lot of new species coming to your island, which might drag down the biodiversity. So clearly, Madagascar has the upper hand in this one, a lot closer to mainland than the French Southern and Antarctic lands. Okay, good question. That's just how I think of it. If a bird or something was going to move to Madagascar, it'd be more likely to move somewhere closer than further away. That's how I think of it. If it doesn't work for you, you might, I don't know, just think of like animals moving from the mainland to an island. You want to be close so those animals can more easily get there, if that makes sense. So the next factor we come to is the size of the island. So the main thing we think about here is resources. A large island is going to have lots of resources. If you think about Madagascar, they have tons of resources. We think rainforest, full of biodiversity, full of animals, and just all of those kinds of things. However, smaller islands, we see competition. And this is where we see this evolution idea play into it. All these different species are competing for resources. So we can't the small little French island we have over here is not going to support as many species as Madagascar is. So we see different animals adapting to overcome this limited amount of resources. So again, Madagascar has the upper hand in this battle, I guess, by being larger. All right, and then we have human influence. This is a big one because it's like a lot of people think like, okay, habitat destruction and invasive species, which is what I wrote, but we also impact it in so many other ways. Pollution plays a big role in this. Like we have these big plastic gyres out in the ocean that are moving plastic all around everywhere, and this pollution that's getting to these islands definitely negatively impacts island biogeography and the biodiversity on these islands. And also invasive species, that definitely is one of the big ones. An invasive species is supposed to be there. They can take out keystone species, which a keystone species means they're vital for that area. So once you start removing those, then you have a problem. The habitat starts to fall, which leads to habitat destruction, but also humans might lead to habitat destruction physically by destructing rainforest and other stuff such as that. All right, so let's look back over this. So we said that Madagascar is larger, okay, and why, if we're looking back, why do you want a larger island versus a smaller island when thinking about biodiversity? Answer in the chat while we continue to discuss. Distance from mainland. We're closer to the mainland. Doesn't mean we're going to have animals move in there. It's just an increased probability of them being able to get onto the island. And then finally, yeah, these French islands over here, they are very, very small. They're really far from the mainland. So that's really dragging them down as their size and their distance from mainland. So human interaction, we have some interaction with Madagascar, especially with habitat destruction and stuff like that. That's a big one that plays in there. This land over here, this island, humans, I don't really have a big impact here, and you've never really heard of it before, so that's probably a good indication that it's not doesn't have a large human interaction. So ultimately, we boil down to this: Madagascar larger, more resources, close to the mainland. Organisms are more likely to possibly move or switch. It's highly unlikely. Like, you're not going to see an elephant move from Africa to Madagascar, but birds maybe. So ultimately, we're going to have more some human interaction, which drags it down a little bit. But ultimately, we're going to see Madagascar, like Riley and Vera said, that has more biodiversity ultimately. And the French land, small island, not many resources. We do see a lot of evolution here, so that's important. All these organisms are competing for the little resources that are on this island. Little to no interaction, and ultimately has less biodiversity. So any questions? Next, we're going to go into an example to see how this works out on two different islands. So any questions you guys have, just let me know in the chat. Okay. So here we have two islands, Bermuda, which is off the coast of North Carolina, and Taiwan, which is off the coast of China. Looking at these, you can definitely tell they're different in size. So first, look at the size of the island. So Bermuda is very small compared to Taiwan. So what does that mean? What does that mean, the size? If we see the size of the island, what will that mean for resources? In Taiwan, we're going to have more resources ultimately. And then we have human influence. Now, both of these. So which do you, like personally, which do you think would have more human interaction? Let me know in the chat. They're both heavily interacted with by humans. Taiwan, I would say, has less human interaction only because if you look, there's more green and there's more space that's not going to be taken up by human urbanization and stuff like that. However, Bermuda is a very small island and a lot of tourists are going to Bermuda, so that's going to have a heavier human impact. At least that's the logic I put behind it. I might be wrong, but that's how I look at it. And then finally, distance from mainland. Okay, so Bermuda is really, really far from North Carolina. However, Taiwan is very close, so that is not helping Bermuda. No, there's no way that the species over here are going to make it to Bermuda. But also, it just came to me with the bird thing. But you also think fish, I guess. Coastal fish, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, so being far is not going to help the species get there. However, we might see a few species be introduced there. All right, here's a little chart to see this here. So Bermuda, far from mainland, small island, a lot of human interaction. However, and then Taiwan, almost close to the same thing, but Taiwan has a larger island and a lot of human interaction as well. All right. Any questions? All right. Here's a question for you guys to see if you were paying attention. The size of the island impacts what? A, evolution, B, adaptation, C, competition, D, resources, and E, all of the above. Yes, it would be all of the above. Again, we see the few resources. Organisms are competing against each other. They're adapting to survive, and you might see natural selection taking place. Basically, some organisms might not make it. However, some with adaptations will. So if we look on this right here, Bermuda would have the more competition between the animals because it's a small island. All right, island biogeography graph. I think this can be very useful in thinking how all these ideas come together. I'm a math-oriented person, so this helps me, the graph. So according to this, so the left side is rate of immigration, which really dictates how close it is to the mainland. And then this is the rate of extinction, which is small versus large. So what two characteristics, what two curves here make the most number of species, which the number of species is found on the y-axis. So which of these intersections is furthest right? Let me know in the chat which one is furthest right. Which two characteristics make up that intersection? All right, okay, so the furthest right point here is the intersection between the large island curve and close to mainland curve. And that's where you're going to see the most species. Again, this is a theory, okay? So there's a lot of factors playing into this. This is just trying to help us explain what's going on. So you might be like, well, there might be a larger island and they don't have as much, and smaller island and more, but this is a theory. So this is what should happen, what we've seen to work. So here we have a large island close to mainland would probably have the most species, and the least would be far from mainland and small island, which is exactly what we would expect. Which is exactly what we'd expect based on what we discussed. So, thinking back to the Bermuda example, Bermuda's small, far from mainland. Taiwan is large, close to mainland. Which would have more species? According to this graph, which would have more biodiversity? Let me know in the chat. All right, so again, I would agree with what we said. The large island close to mainland would have the most species in an ideal world. Now, there are more factors that we haven't necessarily gone into yet, but okay, repeat the question. So basically what I said was, according to what we looked at with Bermuda and Taiwan, does this graph agree with what we said on the previous slide? Which one has more biodiversity? So you can still, yes, it does, because we said that Taiwan had more, large island close to mainland, which is further right, which has a higher number of species, and then far from mainland, small island has less species. And we can tell by where those two lines intersect. All right, and here is another example. Here is basically where they would be, each of them. Taiwan again for the right. Yeah, so that's how that works. Okay, so next, there's some. Okay, so island biogeography is a very broad theory. So there's some other factors that play into this. There's a lot of factors, and that's why it's so hard to pinpoint exactly what the biodiversity is going to be, but it helps us explain it like I mentioned previously. So tell me a few things that you guys know about the island of Cuba. Just off the top of your head, a few things that you know that you think would impact their biodiversity. Maybe government might not play as big of a role. Okay. So okay, I can see how that would impact the biodiversity. That's not a fact. That would definitely fall under the human interaction. Especially with the rare animals. If they're not as popular on the island and then they're killing them off, that is definitely going to play a big role in the biogeography and biodiversity on that island. Good point there. So there are a few other big ideas that we have in island biogeography. The past few were just main ideas, like the main three, but we're going to look at Cuba to see the few other things. Any other ones that you guys can think of? Any environmental things you guys can think of? All right, well, okay, so based on what we already know, with the three things that we've already discussed in biodiversity, we know that Cuba is a large island, which means it has lots of resources. Let's see, it's close to the mainland, so organisms are more likely to be introduced to the island. There's a lot of human interaction, as a viewer pointed out. So we would say that based on this graph back here, large island close to mainland would have a lot of biodiversity, of course. But there are some other factors that also lead us to believe the same thing. So ocean currents. Ocean currents are going to bring aquatic biodiversity onto the island. Warm tropical water that right where these arrows are, it's coming in right there into the Gulf of Mexico. So with this warm tropical water, we're getting a lot of productivity. This warm water, we see algae growing, organisms are blossoming here. So we have a lot of, it's basically just a biodiversity center, this warm tropical water that's fueling these islands. So we have that. So Cuba and the Dominican Republic and these islands here are being pumped with warm water full of nutrients. So that's supporting their aquatic biodiversity. So we also have a nice warm temperate climate here, much similar to that of a rainforest. So that's also boosting it up. But also another thing you might want to think about is the distance between these two islands. It could be totally possible for animals in Cuba to migrate to the Dominican Republic. I mean, of course, like large animals aren't going to make it across, but it makes it more likely for them to migrate or emigrate from there. So those are some other factors that play a big role in island biogeography. All right, so one more example, and then we'll do some practice. The Galapagos Islands. Okay, so the Galapagos Islands are very synonymous with Charles Darwin. Yes, Charles Darwin. He came up with the theory of evolution and natural selection here. Very well-known scientist. Now, these islands are very small. However, they're relatively close to the mainland. So if we go back a few slides, hold on, go back. Okay, so we see close to the mainland, but small. Falls in this mid zone here. You know, it's small. We have a lot of competition going on. A lot of competition, as we discussed, because the island is small. So relatively went over that. All right, so here we're gonna have a tropical warm climate. Think the beach. Sorry, brain fart. So the tropical warm climate is again a lot like a rainforest. It's supporting all these organisms, tons of biodiversity. So why do you think that the Galapagos Islands were able to develop such a large amount of biodiversity before Darwin got there? We see islands today that are close to the mainland and are small, but sometimes they don't always get with as much biodiversity as the Galapagos did. So what major thing are we going to see here? In the chat, anybody? Okay, well, I want to spoil it for you guys. Time. Maybe not fish evolve on the island. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it's totally possible. It's totally possible, but I don't know how likely that would be. But time, ultimately. Once you take human interaction out of the picture, nature can work on its own. Evolution is happening on its island left and right. Humans aren't interacting with it, and that brings us to our next point. Another factor that plays a big role in island biodiversity is the time that it's isolated. So, like this island was able to sit here, this hot spot of already what had amazing organisms on it, probably had a lot of time to sit there and develop. So over all these hundreds of years, these animals are competing and evolving and adapting, and all this is getting mixed together to create this island that's full of biodiversity. However, then Charles Darwin comes into the picture, and we see after he goes, and then more people start to go, and more people start to go, and more and more people start to go, and then you have the problem of tourism, and that's why today it's such a big thing, conserving the biodiversity on the Galapagos, because we are impeding on that. So that's another thing. Isolation is a big thing about island biogeography. So these islands being isolated allows them to evolve differently than being connected on the mainland. So be sure to remember that as well. All right, so let's go back and look at our graph for some practice. All right, so I also want you guys to remember that it's not going to strictly follow this graph. Like here, close to mainland, small islands here, but it might have more biodiversity than a large island in some points. So don't think, oh, it has to be that. No, this is just a theory trying to describe it. All right, so okay, so let's think here. Think with me. Another question. Island A is far from the mainland and is very small. Island B is close to the mainland and is very large. However, B has experienced a lot of volcanic activity. How will this affect the biodiversity on the island? Give you guys some time to respond in the chat. So we have a lot of volcanic activity. Is that going to... Yes. So that's going to be a major downer on the biodiversity there. Because first off, we have this volcano that's killing everything. And that just, yeah, it doesn't work. I know nature takes its course. But then, okay, so say this is, I'm trying to think, say Cuba develops okay, let's think of two islands. Okay, so we have Bermuda and we have Taiwan, which we discussed. Bermuda is very far away from the mainland, but Taiwan is very close. If a volcano erupted, I know there might not be volcanoes on both, but theoretically, if a volcano erupted on both, theoretically, according to island biogeography, which would most likely restore its biodiversity first? Which would be most likely? So think, we're looking at the rate of immigration here. So which would most likely replenish their biodiversity first? Yes, the big island, Taiwan. Well, the big island, Taiwan, of course, would. However, it's not the size of the island necessarily. It's more of how close it is to the mainland, because they're more likely to get there. So remember that. So whenever we're thinking about restoring the biodiversity, we're thinking of the immigration rates. And this is where this chart comes in handy. Which one has the highest rate of immigration, which is close to the mainland? So that's what we're going to want to go with. The rate of extinction, see, this is the small and large island. So this is the extinction rate. So we want to look at that. We want to see the immigration rate. All right. So which factor will most likely limit the biodiversity on an Arctic island? A, distance, B, climate, C, size, or D, ocean currents? Which would most likely impact the biodiversity on an Arctic island? Yes, the climate, practically. Because not a lot of animals are going to be able to develop on this island. So that's another thing to consider, is the climate. Make sure that it's suitable for organisms. All right, let's see here. Let's talk a little bit more about evolution on these islands. All right. All right, so we said that small islands have a lot more competition going on. So I don't know if I want to go there or not. So if we look at the Galapagos again, the small island in a way helped it. The limited resources helped these organisms sort of kind of battle it out for resources. So let's see here. Okay, so picture in your head, or go to Google Maps if you need to. Which of the following would most likely have the most evolution? Hawaii or Japan? Think about it. Okay, yes. So Japan. Okay, so Japan. Okay, not thinking about biodiversity and what we already know. Which would have the most competition? Which would be Hawaii because it's smaller. But also, when thinking about islands like Hawaii, we also have to think about the volcanic activity there and the human impact. So don't forget about that one because that is very important. So any questions that you want me to answer? Anything? So you have a question, I'm guessing? Yes, you have a question. All right, so okay, so grass on islands is just something that is something that just sits there. Okay, so ignoring that. Trying to think. Okay, so all right, so let's think more about this competition idea, and we'll use this one. All right, so we have Bermuda here. Actually, we'll go to the Galapagos. Those are some good examples. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about adaptations and why they're caused by island biodiversity. Okay, so a specific example of this would be resources here. There are a lot of birds on the island and a lot of organisms that have to eat and get stuff and get food and other resources. So does anybody know about the different adaptations that birds have here? Anybody? All right. Well, so basically the birds developed different curved beaks based on what they ate off of these trees. Longer curved beaks because some decided to start digging into the ground and finding mussels and other things like that. And other things such as that. Sure, no questions, anybody? Any questions at all? Anything? All right, let's see. Trying to think. All right, let's see here. Okay, how about this one? This question. All right, so we look at ocean currents. How might ocean currents impact an Arctic island? There's a lot of them near Greenland. How might those impact? And if you guys don't know, then I can answer. Okay, so okay, so they are going to thinking about this logically, because this is a theory, and it's sort of kind of fun to think about like all the different things that are happening. So if you look at, let's say, an island near Greenland, right, and it's really cold. Well, these warm ocean currents that might possibly make it up there might warm it up a little bit, which might bring species up there. I really think that's it. Does anybody have any other questions? anything? If we don't have any questions, then I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for tuning in. It means a lot. First live stream. I hope you guys come back and view more live streams. Thank you guys. Good night.